It's time to talk Stadia and what's going on with the other game streaming platform. The gaming industry is a bit of a fire right now, and then depending on where you sit around the campfire, either the smoke is in your face or you've got a lot of good things going on right now because you're setting things ablaze. In the past roughly month, we have seen Take-Two acquire Zynga for $12.7 billion. We've seen Microsoft try to acquire Activision for $70 billion. I say try to acquire because they still have to get that through the process and everything else is going on. And we also see Sony working to acquire Bungie as well for over $3 billion. There is just a lot of movement in the gaming industry, and quite candidly, if you're not buying, you're falling behind, except for Nintendo. Nintendo's probably like one of the few that can get away with that. But when it comes to game streaming platforms, there's Microsoft Game Pass, there's Stadia, there's also Luna, and Sony's working on some stuff, but primarily we hear about Game Pass or cloud gaming from Microsoft, and we hear about Stadia, and this time we're talking about Stadia because the headlines have been ablaze, and Stadia definitely has a little bit of smoke in the face, not necessarily a great thing, but we need to talk through it. So first up, Business Insider came out with a report that says, hey, Stadia has been deprioritized, with Phil Harrison now reporting to Jason Rosenthal rather than directly higher up the food chain, meaning, hey, it's been pushed down. We're also hearing that the back end of Stadia, the technology has been kind of rebranded called Google Stream and is being used by other vendors, which is companies like Peloton, although they're not officially saying they are. And it also looks like AT&T and a few others are actually using Google Stream to utilize that software stack to deliver content in an interactive way from the cloud to the endpoint with low grade hardware. And by low grade, I mean just think like phone or tablet or just non-gaming PC, if you will. So, what is going on with Stadia? Well, we have a little bit of information in the BI report that talks about, hey, in 2020, there were only 750,000 active, and we don't quite know what active truly means, if that means on a weekly basis, daily, or annualized basis, but it was less than 1 million players active on Stadia. It was about 750,000 is the number they pegged. Now, Destiny 2, a widely popular title, which is one of the reasons probably Sony snapped up Bungie, reportedly only had 5,000 players on Stadia. Now, it's a free-to-play game, but it's 5,000 players on Stadia. Every other platform, the lowest number active user count was about 250,000. So it's not even close about how many people are playing on Stadia versus things like Xbox, Steam, or PlayStation for that matter. Just everything else is just blowing it out of the water. And this isn't a big surprise because, as I knocked off here at the top of the little video, is that if you're not buying, you're falling behind. And Stadia absolutely is falling behind because it's not just one thing to be able to play a game on your service. It has to be appealing. And right now, buying a game on Stadia is a very risky proposition because you're locked in effectively to that platform. Yeah, there are some caveats to that. But for the most part, it's like, why would you buy it on Stadia versus Steam? It gets a little bit tricky if you're looking for cloud gaming. I guess Stadia is the way to go, but then you got Microsoft. But I digress. The point being is that buying content on Stadia is pretty risky, and so it's got to be tough. And like I empathize with the people working on Stadia because, quite candidly, Microsoft, Google has a very good stack when it comes to Stadia. Honestly, it might even be better than what Microsoft has with Game Pass or cloud gaming when it comes to a pure technology implementation. But the reality is that Microsoft's solution, as I've said many, many times, it's a feature, not the product. Meaning you buy Game Pass Ultimate, you can get all these games, but you can also cloud stream it. You can also play it on all these other endpoints. It's a feature and not the product. And that appears to be the problem with Stadia, is that the feature that on other platforms is a feature, it is the product. And the product itself isn't good enough to get people to jump over to that side of the fence. The other thing too, and anybody who's been on the internet for more than 30 seconds knows that Google likes to just move away from things. Like if it's not a huge blow up and take over the scene instantly, it kind of just falls away. They're typically not in it for the long haul. And when game development cycles take 3 years at minimum, sometimes up to 5 years for a quad A, triple A game, that's longer than Google's horizon when it comes to Stadia even existing for them to recapitalize on their another bet. Microsoft is very much in this for the long haul. They've been around since the original Xbox, and now they're going to that streaming model and the Game Pass model. But Stadia is relatively fresh on the block, and they've got to be in it for the long haul. And there's no indications from Google that they're willing to make those big investments. They're not willing to go out and spend $70 billion on an Activision. How many ever billions on an EA? Probably, like, I think last time I looked, their market cap was in the mid 40s. Not super positive on that, but I don't think anybody listening to this would agree that, yeah, Google's probably going to go out and spend tens of billions of dollars to snatch up the IP that is so critical to services like this. It doesn't matter that they have PUBG, which was filled with bots and didn't do very well. It doesn't matter that they have Destiny 2, because you can play those titles elsewhere. And more importantly, you can probably play them elsewhere at a better resolution or gaming service, or for less money, depending on how you want to go about it. So Stadia is in a rough spot from a brand. Now, the thing I think Google is doing right, and the reason why I don't ever think Stadia will truly die, if you will, is that they are going about it from the Microsoft way. They're looking at it as a corporate solution, which is very, very smart, right? If they can get companies like Peloton, although they have their own struggles, but AT&T, and prove that they can deliver this as a white label or a clean label product, you come up, bring your title over, it looks all like your own. We don't worry about it. Just pay us our monthly bill for using Google Cloud. That is a very lucrative model, and that is one that Microsoft likes, and candidly, Microsoft is trying to push that as well with their Game Pass technology. Now, they're not putting it under Game Pass, but if a company comes to Microsoft and says, hey, can you stream a game for us? Microsoft has the stack, and that is a corporate solution that Microsoft loves to sell rather than to the direct consumer. It's quite candidly interesting that Microsoft is delivering the stack as a consumer service through Microsoft Game Pass Ultimate, because that is not typically how they operate. Xbox inside the world of Microsoft is an outlier, not in terms of revenue or size or anything like that, but Microsoft typically builds for the enterprise, and if there's a consumer application to it, then they go for that route. But they make their money in the enterprise. Microsoft, the fact that they're doing so well with Xbox is an anomaly. I mean, we can name things: Windows Phone, Zune, Band. They all just don't work out with the consumer, and that's why Microsoft typically sticks with where it does well, which is why Google getting some traction in that arena is probably a good thing. It might be the thing that keeps Stadia alive in some capacity. Now, Stadia did come out and tweet and says, hey, look, be on the lookout. Like, we have new features coming, and they're not going to come out and say, hey, yeah, BI's right, we're shutting down the doors next month. Stadia, let me qualify that. If Google is going to shut down Stadia, the consumer end service, they will not do it on somebody else's timeline. It'll be when they want to announce it under their own messaging. They're not going to come out and confirm a report that, hey, look, Stadia's done, stop playing it, move on, life is over. They're not going to come out and say that. That would be crazy, mostly because, again, they're still utilizing that front end service to develop the back end technology, which is where Google is hopefully making money. The thing is, well, Stadia is in a rough spot. There's no arguing that. I truly and genuinely don't want it to go away. I mean, I play Stadia. Like, I've used it. I don't use it every day or even every month, candidly, but I'm not somebody who's never used it. Like, I bought into Stadia and tried it out and gave it a good, solid effort. And candidly, we as gamers are better off the more platforms there are, the more Stadias out there, the more Lunas, the more Game Pass Ultimate, the more aggressive that Microsoft has to be, and more aggressive that Sony has to be. So I don't want this video to come off that I want Stadia to go away. I genuinely don't. I like competition in the marketplace, but Microsoft, I'm so used to saying that, Microsoft has made the investments where it needs to continue to grow. Google has not. They have the back-end technology, which is great, but they're lacking the IP, and I don't see them dishing out the big dollars to make it happen. And I think that is what is eventually going to be the death knell of Stadia. So as we learn more and sort of follow and evolve what is happening with Stadia, I'm going to keep a close eye on what Google says publicly, especially they have their I/O developer conference coming up in a couple months. It's always in a spring event, but we're not too far outside that. I'm not expecting them to come out and say anything at that event, but it would be interesting to see if they do talk about Google Stadia / Google Stream, because it does have applicable uses on the Android side. So that might be another time. There's also the Game Developer Conference coming up, and that could also be another timeline where Google talks about Stadia and what is truly happening. That being said, make sure to keep it subscribed here to learn about everything that is going on, because the only BS on this channel is me.